Hi. Wanted to talk about some of the aspects of culture in the 1970s. Sometimes this is called the Me Decade, based on an essay by famed author and journalist Tom Wolfe. And there's a quote from his article about it saying that we are now in the Me Decade, seeing the upward roll of the third great religious wave in American history. And he wasn't talking about an actual religion, but he's talking about this focus on oneself, individualism, leaning more towards narcissism. Um, we can see this in the rise of talk show culture. This is Phil Donahue, who started in the 70s, and a show where people would come on and talk about most private aspects of their lives. This gives rise to all the talk shows we have today. Oprah, Ellen, all come from the model that Phil Donahue started. Um, Clothing is changing, much more casual clothing, wearing jeans, longer hair, polyester suits, wearing men wearing their shirts unbuttoned. I remember how my professor, when I was in grad school, the chairman of the department, would come in with his shirt unbuttoned down to there and several gold change, and it was really out there at the time. And this is a period where jogging and the health craze becomes very important. People are jogging all over. If the anti-war protester was the symbol of the 60s, the jogger was the symbol of the 70s. This is Lee Majors, who starred in The $6 Million Man, and Farrah Fawcett from Charlie's Angels. They're jogging. Bodybuilding. This is when Schwarzenegger becomes a worldwide celebrity. And based on basically this documentary about his bodybuilding experience. People were into health foods, organic foods. That starts in this period. A best selling book was Looking Out for Number One, all about how to get everything you want out of your life, how to be your own best friend. And that was a huge bestseller. It was also changes with drugs. These are Valium, which were very popular as antidepressants in the period. I remember watching a movie in the 70s, and the woman's freaking out, and the man says, "Does anyone here have a Valium?" And everybody opens their purse, and they all have Valium, and that was a joke from the period. It's also a period of the sexual revolution. Our Bodies Ourselves was a book put out by a Boston women's group to help women celebrate their own sexuality. Another book was Joy of Sex, which was all about loosening attitudes towards premarital sex. Extramarital sex, there was a big rise in pornography. This is what Times Square looked like in the 1970s. All sorts of porno movie theaters. It's really been cleaned up since then. Big place to go was Club 54 in New York City, where you had to be a celebrity almost to get in, and it had a very hedonistic atmosphere of drugs, sex, all going on there, all sorts of ties, different types of sex. You have the women's movement growing up in this period. We talked about Betty Friedan, her book, The Feminine Mystique, from the 1960s, which was really addressing 50s culture, the idea of what she called the problem that has no name, that women are at home and they're bored with their lives. And this gave rise to, in the 60s, the National Organization for Women, and fighting for the things you wrote about on your Google Doc last week. They're looking for equality in laws, divorce law changes. This is the era in the 70s where no-fault divorce, where before you had to prove that someone had cheated or there had been abuse or abandonment. Now you could just say we're incompatible. It became much easier to get divorced, and where you also had laws for women in the workplace. Here in the 1968 Miss America pageant, they're protesting that it's like a cattle call, and here you can see the woman has the lines on her like you'd have the lines of beef on a cow. Women burned their bras at the Miss America pageant. The pill, which was approved, I think, in 1960, that really changed sexual habits, that now women could have sex without worrying about getting pregnant, which led to a lot more premarital sex. Okay. And there's a push in the 70s for the Equal Rights Amendment, which stated that, okay, I have the quote here of what it said, that there should be no discrimination on the basis of sex. This goes through Congress. They get the 2/3 of both houses. It goes out to the states, and it falls short of getting the 3/4 of the state. And when it was sent out, it was given a 7-year time limit. And in 1978, when they didn't have that, they expanded it to 1982, but they still didn't get the sufficient number of states to approve it, and there were even some states that had approved it who then rescinded their approval, and so it didn't pass. And a lot of it was due to this woman, Phyllis Schlafly, who led the Stop ERA movement, arguing that the law would change a lot of accepted protections for women, like women getting preference for child custody in divorce cases. She argued, there was the argument it would lead to getting rid of different bathrooms for men and women, that women would have to be drafted, and it would make abortion more widespread. And she's an interesting person. I believe Daisy's playing her in the Round Table, that she was a lawyer and she ran this whole movement from her house while she still had 5 children that she raised. Also, in this period, abortion is legalized in 1973 in Roe v. Wade. Here it's being announced that it was legalized. I just have always noted the day that decision came out was also the day that Lyndon Johnson died. Nothing to do with each other, but I thought it was an interesting juxtaposition. Okay. The gay liberation movement starts in this period. You read about it in your book. It begins with the Stonewall riots. In 1969, Stonewall was a gay nightclub that the police kept raiding, and just this one night in 1969, they were fed up with all the raids. They went into the street, they started rioting. It led to more street protests, and this is really the beginning of the gay rights movement. In 1970, we get the first gay liberation, gay pride parade, and people started, pushing for the movement for the decriminalization of homosexual behavior, and to be proud, to be, out and proud. In 1973, the American Psychiatric Association reverses its policy listing homosexuality as a mental disorder. 18 states get rid of sodomy laws, but we're going to have to wait till I believe it's 2005. I might be wrong. 2003. Lawrence v. Texas, where the Supreme Court struck down those anti-sodomy laws. This is also the era of disco culture, which comes out of the gay culture at gay nightclubs, but really goes mainstream with a lot of hits. Here's Saturday Night Live with John Travolta, which really made it popular. And then there was a backlash against it in 1979. There was, at White Sox ball game, was announced Disco Demolition Night, and they came out at the, I believe it was at the seventh inning stretch, and people were, maybe it was before the game, that if you brought in disco records to be destroyed, then you could get in free. So all these people came and they ran out on the field and they started destroying their records, and the game had to be postponed. So there's this backlash against disco and all that music, and there's this tension between those who liked rock and roll and those who liked disco. I was on the rock and roll side. Another thing that changes in this period was the end of the melting pot, the idea that immigrants would come here and learn about American culture and assimilate into American culture. I was looking for a picture. This reminded me when I was in, I think it was fifth or sixth grade, there was a picture in my textbook where they showed just like this, a pot, and then there were all sorts of people floating into the pot wearing ethnic clothing, like looking like a little Dutch girl or a French man or a British wearing a British soldier's uniform, a Russian guy, and they're all going into this pot, and then they're coming out and they all look like Uncle Sam and a female sort of Americanized woman. And that's when, in the 60s, when I was in school, that was the ideal. But we lose this idea, the idea that the goal was the melting pot, and now it should be more of a mixed salad, fruit salad. You also have people trying to discover their roots, their genealogy, ethnic pride, and this sense of pride in your own heritage rather than in this idea that we're all trying to have this American culture. The big breakout moment for this for African Americans was Alex Haley's book Roots, about tracing his family's history from Africa to the present day, and it became one of the most watched miniseries on TV at the time. Another change in this period is people rediscovering Southern culture. Leonard Skinner with Southern rock, their song Alabama, saying we Southern man don't need anyone coming around making fun of Alabama. Dukes of Hazzard was a popular TV show, and this sort of rebellious attitude, and their car was the General Lee. They have the Confederate flag painted on top. NASCAR becomes big around the country growing out of Prohibition. Real popular movie was Burt Reynolds and Smokey and the Bandit, which was also this rebellion against the bad guy sheriff who's chasing him. Country music becomes real popular in this time. Here's a young Willie Nelson of this period. And so people who used to look to Southern culture as Jim Crow and the target of the civil rights movement, now people across the country were embracing it for its sort of rebellious against the man attitude. It's an interesting change. Well, thank you. That's my quick overview.